Mankind has reached its next frontier. It feels like we say that every generation, but this time the future is here. It's called AI. Artificial intelligence can be a scary thing, from Terminator to iRobot to Her and countless other films that give us a glimpse as to what the future can look like with an AI society. We've seen time and again movies and works of literature that warn us about the dangers of mixing humanity with this technology. But what if we could get ahead of it right now? California is working on an AI safety bill that would require rigorous safety testing and comprehensive safety measures before AI products are made available to the public, be it in the workplace or online. In Washington, Senator Schumer looks to pass several artificial intelligence bills through, especially ones that will crack down on deepfakes and generated misinformation. But can we trust the government to regulate what is truly real and what is not? The internet truly is the Wild West, and misinformation surrounds us daily. But in this age of speech, repression, and censorship that seems to target mostly conservatives in this country, how can we trust any of this legislation? Joining us now is John Mates, CEO of Hedgehog, an app that promotes rational discussion, something fairly rare today. John, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on.
You know, I take real issue with how conservatives talk about AI these days. I think there's a misconception that AI is a very scary thing. I think it is, but it's also an incredible tool. And way too many conservatives think it's too scary, and so they just walk away and they think, oh, well, maybe we'll just legislate it. Maybe we can legislate it and hop onto some bipartisan legislation. I take issue with that because I think it sets dangerous precedent. But correct me if I'm standing on the wrong side here. What do you think?
I'm always really weary of legislation. It seems to typically make things worse once it gets involved. I am, however, advocating right now for transparency in the AI space. There are these things called LLMs. They're large language models. It's a portion of a lot of this generative AI that's come out. And it's like a collection of all this data from all over the world. You can imagine they're pulling it from Google, news articles, whatever they might be able to get their hands on. Massive amounts of data. We don't know what's in there. There is a lack of transparency. No one's come out and published their large LLMs, at least not any of the major people developing these products. And so we don't know if there's bias. We don't know if they're stealing people's IP in there. And I think if there were transparency on behalf of the companies and we pressured the companies to do it directly rather than through legislation, I think we might see these tools be a little healthier.
Wow, that's music to my ears. And that's a distinction I don't think very many people are making when talking about this. Transparency instead of legislation. Obviously, that should be the first steps, but I think that people, especially lawmakers, they don't understand it, and so they instantly go to what they do understand, which is making more rules and regulations. I know that right now we're being stripped of ads and viewpoints. Ads and viewpoints are being cracked down online, especially in the UK. I know that back in 2003 we had this really scary piece of legislation called the Communications Act of 2003. It's now becoming way more in the news. We're starting to see people talk about what the ramifications of that totalitarian law looks like. And that looks like police officers showing up at your door because you said something on social media that somebody in the world took offense to. That's really scary when you see legislation like that that's already in place. And you have lawmakers here in the United States who don't necessarily understand this, who just you may adapt bits and pieces of this because they don't understand AI or large language models.
Sure, and that may be a consequence that we might not feel for years. So the AI legislation that may come through may have unintended consequences 10 years from now that we might not be able to predict. And that's a lot of the problem with relying on the government to solve these issues for us. I think that this election cycle, a lot of the politicians who've proposed legislation right now are doing it because they're anticipating that AI will play a role in this election, either through deepfakes or what they're going to call misinformation. I'm worried that that's queuing up an argument for the next Hunter Biden laptop scandal, if you will. If you remember back in the
Yeah.
last presidential election, there were a number of experts who claimed that that information about the Hunter Biden laptop was misinformation and therefore it was censored
Oh.
across all platforms.
I remember this well. We were Orion was the third. I was the third hand to have that laptop, and instantly we had these guys come out with very interesting language, saying that this had all the hallmarks of Russian propaganda, but they didn't really say it was. And then as a result, like you're about to mention, social media cracked down on it.
Exactly. That was enough information to say, oh, well, an expert said this, let's just censor it off of every platform. I think this year we're going to see the same tactics with, we have an expert who thinks this is AI generated on the next piece of content that comes out. It turns out it wasn't,
Yes.
but that was enough information that an expert believed this for all of the platforms to take that piece of information down, whatever that will be in this election cycle. So that worries me as well. And I think we need to stay a step ahead of that as society and be able to say, is this really AI generated? And how do we build places where we can actually trust analysts saying this is or isn't data instead of just any old expert making that claim and it being enough to take the information down.
Well, we get into a very slippery slope discussion. As you well know, I mean, you were formerly the CEO of Parler and you departed the platform because you wanted to moderate it against the wishes of some of its stakeholders, according to Business Insider. What did you feel needed moderating? And isn't that what the lawmakers are trying to do here in regards to this legislation?
I think that we're in a place today which is really amazing. There's so much competition for free speech online. No one online today is pure a free speech purist. There is no place that has that. So my version of moderation is, what does our community want? And how do we give people the tools? And we do that on Hedgehog as well. How do we give people the tools to moderate it on their behalf rather than a central authority doing it? And that's really where my vision is. And you have a lot of places out there today, and this is great news. There's a marketplace of free speech or sites that allow for differentiating what is allowed on their platform. You've got Truth, you've got Twitter, you have now Threads if you are into that. There's so many places out there. And so for me, what's really important is giving that to people, decentralizing that.
Agency. Okay, so I walked into some of these topics expecting to have a very different conversation with you, John, but actually that's another very interesting wrinkle that you're adding to the conversation. So instead of having, a centralized head office based in San Francisco editing what people say, you're arguing for not only transparency for the companies and their algorithms, but give more agencies to the individuals using the platform rather than have the head office put some kid on a desk editing what people are saying.
Exactly. Ultimately, at the end of the day, companies are going to make rules, regardless of whether they are a free speech site or not, to keep some kind of actors off their page, whether it's scammers, spammers, bots, those girls who always text people, check out link in bio. No one wants that stuff on the platform. So there's going to be some form of moderation, and maybe there's even some AI there to help trigger those moderation events for things that the community can't solve, like those, spammers and bots and things like that. But for everything else,
let me ask you this. Let me ask you this about some of the deepfake videos that are coming out. A huge problem, absolutely something that's going to be misused by bad actors. We've already seen it misused. You've seen famous people's faces being placed on pornography, and it's a huge problem. The remedies for that, I haven't quite seen a remedy outside of just straight out suing people that seems to balance civil liberties, if you will, that balances free speech. How do you crack down on something that's, AI deepfake generated pornography, but also maintain an ability to, allow people to comment and parody things?
Yeah, I mean, in my world, we start by saying I don't really want nudity on my site or pornography. So that's what we do to solve it. But other sites are going to have a really difficult question there because how do you tell the difference between a deep fake and not? And we're going to need to come up with some sort of transparent system to figure that out rather than relying on one or two experts. We know that that's going to lead us down the wrong path.
The cyber world just is so scary in that regard, though, because I'm curious, I'm sure that once we create some system where we say, oh, this is wonderful, here's transparency, now we can tell what is an AI deepfake and what isn't. Aren't bad actors just going to find a way around that and continue to try and feed false info? Isn't there technically a way around all of that?
Yeah, it's the never-ending battle of whack-a-mole. You're going to constantly trying to get a leverage up on them, and they're going to try to do the same to you. If you remember, only 1 year ago, the easiest way to determine a deep fake was to count the number of fingers somebody had. When they had like 20 fingers, you're like, okay, obviously that was an AI video. They're getting better.
Right.
So
But
it's
now they're
always
getting
progressing.
better, yeah.
Well,
John, it's a pleasure to chat with you, bringing some more angles onto this conversation that I think are not being addressed in this discussion. It's a very needed conversation, especially in freedom-loving circles. So we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on. It was great. Take care.
For all our viewers asking where One America News is heading in the future, we would like to introduce you to OAN Live. OAN Live is the best way to stay up to date on all of the hard-hitting, straight-shooting, national and international headlines. And the best part is, OAN Live is only $4.99 per month. All the credible, honest, unbiased reporting One America News offers at a fraction of the cost of cable. Just go to OANN.com to easily sign up for OAN Live and stay informed.